An independent editorial defense analysis focused on Australia's strategic environment.
The trajectory of uncrewed aerial warfare has long been defined by a binary choice between high-end, exquisite systems or low-cost disposable munitions. However, the emergence of the MQ-28 Ghostbat Block 3 signals a deliberate departure from this dichotomy. It introduces a platform that attempts to bridge the gap between mass and survivability. The recent confirmation of critical design changes, specifically the integration of an internal weapons bay and an extended fuselage, represents more than a mere iterative update. It marks a fundamental shift in the operational concept of the Royal Australian Air Force. The program is no longer solely about creating a sensor-bearing, loyal wingman to support crewed assets. It appears to be evolving toward a distributed strike capability, or one designed to address the unique geographical tyranny of the Indo-Pacific theater. The physical evolution of the airframe from Block 2 to Block 3 provides the clearest indicator of this strategic pivot. The decision to lengthen the fuselage, to expand the wingspan to approximately 9 meters. This is driven by the immutable physics of endurance and payload. In the context of Northern Australian defense, range is the primary currency of relevance. Operations launched from RAAF Base Tyndall or other austere northern airfields require transit distances that severely tax the combat radius of tactical fighters like the F-35A Lightning II, at least without extensive aerial refueling support. By increasing internal fuel capacity by a reported 30%, the Block 3 variant addresses the logistical bottleneck of tanker availability. It suggests a doctrinal recognition. For an autonomous system to be operationally viable in the archipelagos to the north, it must possess the legs to loiter and fight, without constantly tethering to a vulnerable KC-30A multi-role tanker transport. Central to this evolution is the integration of an internal weapons bay. This engineering choice fundamentally alters the radar cross-section profile of the aircraft. Previous iterations or hypothetical configurations utilizing external pylons would have compromised the low observable characteristics necessary for survival in contested airspace. The insistence on internal carriage implies that the Ghostbat is being groomed for high-threat environments where signature management is non-negotiable. This moves the platform from a support role, such as acting as a decoy or communication node, into the domain of the shooter. It enables the distribution of lethality across a wider network, allowing a crewed flight lead to project force without exposing their own airframe to immediate retribution. Consequently, the enemy entails a more complex targeting problem, forcing them to expend high-value interceptors against uncrewed systems. However, this capability growth introduces a complex economic and strategic trade-off regarding the concept of attritability. The foundational promise of the loyal wingman concept was the creation of an asset affordable enough to be lost in combat, without catastrophic strategic impact. As the Ghostbat accumulates capabilities, such as advanced low-observable coatings, internal weapons mechanisms, and likely sophisticated electronic warfare suites, the unit cost inevitably rises. If the price point climbs significantly above initial projections, pushing toward 20 million Australian dollars or higher, the willingness of commanders to sacrifice the asset diminishes. The platform risks entering a gray zone, too expensive to be truly expendable, yet lacking the multifaceted survivability of a fully crewed fighter. This necessitates a rigorous reevaluation of the risk calculus, potentially forcing planners to reserve the Ghostbat for missions of moderate risk rather than the high-stakes vanguard roles originally envisioned. From an industrial perspective, the progression to Block 3 tests the maturity of the Australian aerospace sector. This is not simply an assembly task. It is a design and engineering challenge that places the onus of sovereign capability on local subsidiaries and supply chains. The move to a larger armed variant requires the integration of complex subsystems. From weapons release interfaces to flight control software capable of managing the shifted center of gravity. The success of this endeavor serves as a litmus test for the ability of Australian industry to support a major combat aircraft program, independent of immediate foreign military sales pipelines. It also highlights the tension between sovereign design and the necessity of interoperability. For the Ghost Bat to function effectively alongside U.S. Navy or U.S. Air Force assets, its software architecture must remain tightly coupled with American standards, creating a dependency that persists even if the airframe is manufactured in Queensland. The interest from the United States Navy in the Block 3 configuration further complicates the developmental roadmap. While foreign investment and acquisition validation are essential for driving down unit costs through economies of scale, diverging requirements could fracture the program's focus. The United States Navy prioritizes carrier aviation suitability and specific carrier control area integration, requirements that differ vastly from the runway-dependent operations of the Royal Australian Air Force. Balancing these divergent needs without bifurcating the production line into incompatible variants will be a significant program management challenge. It raises the question of whether the Australian design can remain agile enough to serve its primary user, while accommodating the heavyweight requirements of its most likely export customer. Furthermore, the introduction of an armed autonomous system necessitates the development of a robust legal and ethical framework for employment. While overarching policy dictates human-on-the-loop oversight, the tactical reality of electronic warfare and communications-denied environments suggests something else: that the machine will require substantial localized autonomy. The Block 3 capabilities imply an ability to execute strike chains with minimal latency. This places immense pressure on trusted autonomy algorithms to distinguish valid targets from decoys or civilian infrastructure without constant real-time referral to a human operator. The technical maturation of the airframe appears to be outpacing the public articulation of the rules of engagement that will govern its use, creating a policy lag that could constrain operational deployment. The integration of the Ghost Bat Block 3 also demands a rethink of force structure and personnel allocation. A single pilot in an F-35A or a crew in an E-7A Wedgetail managing a formation of 3 to 4 armed drones represents a cognitive workload challenge, one that current training pipelines have yet to fully address. The effectiveness of the system is not defined solely by the aerodynamic performance of the drone, but by the interface that allows a human to command it. If the interface is cumbersome, the extra firepower provided by the internal weapons bay becomes a liability, rather than an asset. Therefore, the arrival of Block 3 necessitates a parallel investment in AI-enabled mission management software that can interpret intent rather than requiring micromanagement. Ultimately, the Ghost Bat Block 3 represents a definitive step away from the experimental fringe and into the core combat structure of the Australian Defence Force. It embodies a recognition that mass and technology must be blended to generate combat power in a resource-constrained environment. Yet this progression is not without its paradoxes. By making the drone more capable, lethal, and survivable, the defense establishment creates an asset that becomes increasingly difficult to treat as disposable ammunition. The strategic value of the program will likely settle not on its ability to be thrown away in a singular act of attrition, but on its capacity to impose a dilemma on an adversary, forcing them to respect a distributed threat that is technically sophisticated enough to kill, yet numerous enough to overwhelm